Hello, everybody. My name is Forrest. I'm feeling pretty tired. I'm gonna do a video today to talk about the safety features of the most common handgun on the planet now, probably the Glock. Okay. A few of you have probably seen the video I released where I had one discharge. I guess accidentally. It was not a negligent discharge because I was not the one to pull the trigger. Nobody pulled the trigger. Gravity did. Yeah. So let's talk about that. This is a Glock. It's actually my carry Glock, and it has no real Glock parts in it. I think the slide release might be OEM, but that's about it. Okay? But this functions in the same way that a Glock does. This is a Shadow Systems trigger shoe, but it works in the same way a Glock does. Everything on this gun is compatible with a Glock. If the Gen 3 patent were still trademarkable or copyrightable, this would be sued into oblivion. So, we'll talk about how my gun went off towards the end, and let's talk about some of the safety features of this system. First off, let's talk about the operating system. It is a delayed blowback, if you want to call it. It's really a short recoil action. So, for about the first, 1/100th of a millisecond, when this gun fires, the barrel and slide move together in unison before barrel is basically running on a track, but via the locking block, is forced down. This prevents you, this is one safety feature to prevent, it's not designed by Glock, but it prevents premature unlock of the system, or it allows you to save weight on the slide and recoil spring. But if you didn't have that, if you chose to, this locking surface right here, grind it down, and it already has friction here from rubbing, but if you take a Dremel to that incorrectly, like I see some people doing, in order to smooth their system up with an FRT, what you can have is premature unlock, and then you could have in theory, you could have your casing become the projectile, bullet stay in the barrel, squib, and excess damage done to the system, if not to the shooter. That is a safety feature, I consider, because it prevents you from being harmed by the gun, okay? It's also inherent to the operating system, right? The next safety is arguably the single most important one. And we'll come back around. Actually, we're gonna do that last. So, the Glock, it is technically a double action striker, in that the trigger performs two actions. If you look through the crack in your upper and lower or the frame, you will see the the shark fin on your trigger bar move back and then down. That's because the trigger is performing two actions. It is moving the striker back and then releasing it, not unlike a double action revolver or a double action hammer fired gun, where you, like on a Beretta M9, the first shot in the magazine or the first shot in the chamber, you're supposed to have decocked the hammer. That first trigger pull is long and heavy as the hammer comes back and then is released and lets it off, and then the slide cocks the hammer back every shot after that, and then every trigger pull after that is a lot lighter. The Glock, to simplify the system, to not make you have to learn two different trigger pulls, is pre-cocked, or is uncocked every time. However, if you only allow yourself to shoot from the reset, the striker is cocked in that position basically most of the way. Let's talk about the safety mechanism that is inherently part of that. The firing pin block. There's a little button right there. It is pushed by this button moving back. And it depresses that, which can then allow the firing pin to move past, or the striker to move past it. If that is not depressed, you get firing pin protrusion. Okay? Very important. I see people also modifying this to make their FRT shoot faster by either decreasing the spring tension, trimming a coil off of it or something, or potentially polishing the fuck out of this to the point where it will no longer depress the thing, which doesn't ruin the safety feature. It just makes the gun not able to fire if you go too far. And let's talk about one more safety before I get back to the trigger face itself. This is the trigger bar. It runs around this side. It's connected to the trigger. When you pull the trigger, it moves rearward, okay? This is the crucifix. We call it that because it is shaped like a cross. Your sear is hooked right here on this surface. That sear moves rearward and then down, okay? Because of that, it does not matter if you have this thing in a fucking helicopter and you drop it 30,000 feet. It can't go off without the striker first being cocked backwards, right? So the striker has to have more spring tension added to it. It doesn't, even if it is able to move forward from its natural resting point, even if you overcome the firing pin block spring there, or firing pin block, safety block plunger, it does not, the idea there is that it won't have enough momentum. In all reality, you're never getting past that. It's never breaking past that, you just can't. But even if it did, hypothetically, the firing pin would not have enough momentum to protrude fast enough out of the breech face and discharge your round. That's important. That is important. That allows us to have a very safe system without having a pre-cocked striker, which means if anything goes wrong with this system, if any of these other mechanisms fail, it doesn't have enough momentum to set off a round. I think that's where SIG should maybe take a lesson from or something, or figure out something. I don't know. They have a fire. The 320 has a firing pin block. Okay, it even has a thumb safety on the side, but it has a pre-cocked striker. And so, if the firing mechanism is a spring-loaded firing pin, if whatever's holding that spring back fails, separate of a thumb safety or a trigger pull, the gun goes off. That's simply not possible with a Glock because the system is always part of itself in that the trigger pull has to cock the striker every single time. And then, and in that process, I don't know if you could see it through here. It's right there. That safety plunger is depressed, okay? Let's talk about the most important safety and why it failed me. Or why I failed it. The thing about these goddamn Glock F-R2s, and do I have one? Yes. But now kiss. Notice something? No extra little baby trigger on it. That is very important. It's incredibly important if you don't want your gun to discharge from being dropped, okay? I mentioned this in another video. There's a hole right here. There's a hole right here, and there's a hole that goes to the trigger. It's 3 holes in the trigger, okay? There's only 2 on this one. That middle hole is that trigger bar where it connects. The second hole up here is the axis in which the trigger pivots as a whole off of that. And then the very bottom hole is the axis at which the little baby trigger pivots off of. Because they are on 2 completely different axes, and they pivot differently, there is no angle in which in this entire planet that you could drop it and have both of these get pulled. And it's very important that they get pulled in the right order. So you would need a baby trigger to get pulled first and then trigger get pulled, right? When I dropped my gun, it did not have that in it. And it actually wasn't an FRT. What it was it was an FRT without this built-in trip, and it was a little bit limited travel to kind of help the trigger pull. But in all reality, I went back and tested it. I went back and tested it with the Now Kiss, with a 3D printed original style fat lip, with a G-spot with a metal trip on it, with a G-spot without the metal trip on it. And interesting fact, G-spots without the metal trip on it, if you pull the trigger, keep the trigger depressed and do this, sometimes the trigger will just be dead because it won't be able to slip underneath that. But it would still discharge from firing if the gun was already cocked, okay? And that's because there is no safety trigger to block that. All these mechanisms inside of this gun are designed to make it safe for any other reason besides pulling the trigger. But if gravity pulls the trigger for you, then the gun functions exactly as it was designed to, short of having the trigger dingus. It's called a dingus is what I've always heard it called. These do not have that. Because of that, these are range toys. You should not carry with a round in the chamber. You should only chamber around when you are at the range. Now, I would like to take the moment to point out the fact that Blake did what I could never do. I tried to bring it to market, and it's just too much money to invest in something that I was planning on keeping cheap. I tried to design a version of this using Chewy's trigger shoe with a Kiss or a fat lip style trip on top. Wasn't doable. Blake has designed a truly safe trigger, and I don't know where I put mine at. We'll have to find it. I really hope I haven't lost it, but it's probably just buried on my desk somewhere. he designed an FRT with the dingus right here. And I have seen other people modify OEM trigger shoes to have a Pimby style trip. It's just very important that you don't go trying to modify or deactivate safeties on your gun. I figured that what kept the P320 unsafe was the sole fact that it was a pre-cocked striker. That does contribute to its unsafety. But if you go taking away a safety mechanism on the trigger, you're going to be in a world of hurt when you drop the gun like this from a certain height onto a hard enough structure or material. I've had people contact me before. So I dropped mine on my bed, or I dropped mine from 2 feet and it landed, but when it landed, it immediately rolled. Like, no, man, that's not how it works, man. Mine, I was sitting in this chair when it hit. Grip hit the chair, it like rolled and then went off somehow like this at me, SIG position, and that was enough to pull the trigger. Most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me in my life. Perhaps I might put it on the end of this video, but yeah, I hope you guys never deal with that. Do not keep an FRT loaded. This has a lot of safety. This is the safest handgun in the world. I genuinely do believe that. I might be prone to say that a Series 80 1911 might be more safe, but that is a pre-cocked mechanism. And, well, the 1911 safety goes through the entire firing mechanism, and so I would have to say that's probably safer. But a Series 80 does have a firing pin block. They've been done a couple of different ways. I think that the one that comes off of the trigger is kind of the most dog shit way of doing it. I like the grip panel one, but the grip panel one's also the most pointless because when you drop a 1911 like that, it's going to depress the safety, I think. They might be safer, I don't know, but I truthfully believe that this is probably the objectively best handgun. It's not my favorite. Yeah, just be mindful if you're going to be modifying your handgun. Be mindful if you're going to be modifying your Glock to shoot faster, right? This video is mostly in response to FRTs, but I have to imagine if you converted your Glock to full auto, you might be dealing with an entirely different set of safety mechanisms. The likes of which I can't even begin to describe because I don't fucking have a switch or a fucking blicky or whatever the word is. But when you go modifying your gun, the point I'm trying to make is when you go modifying your gun, you are fundamentally changing the way the system works, either by deleting a feature or adding a new one. With the FRT, you are deleting the mechanical reset of the trigger. And so a lot of people take advantage of that and use a static connector housing. That's great. That's great. But please be mindful that some other people have made aftermarket housings and they've broken inside of guns, or they've caused the gun to run away, or gotten multiple shots out of it, right? You shouldn't have a knowledge of how your gun works before you go trying to change it. These things are very dangerous, very scary for a lot of the public. And when you go have accidents in your home, it doesn't help our image in the firearms industry, and I'm guilty of this too by modifying it. And I thought it was safe. Like I said, I thought it was totally safe because Glock doesn't have a pre-cocked striker. Why do I need this little safety dingus? That's just extra. The reality is it's just simply all necessary. It all works together perfectly. And I know I said that firing pin plunger is probably the least important, but that being there in this whole system really just wraps the whole thing up in a beautiful bow tie. Where it's not as beautiful on a 1911. And Series 70s have their own problems too. I'm not here to shit on I mean, I love the 1911. I know the most about it compared to any other handgun, but I'm very quickly learning more about this platform, and I genuinely love this platform. I do, for what it is. It allows me so much more capability in a gunfight than a 8+1 or 9+1 1911 could ever grant me. That being said, this has no style points. This is purely duty use handgun. Yeah.